Hey, welcome back to your Dream Coach podcast. I'm Shayla Way, and I want to start today's episode a little differently. I want you to think back a couple episodes ago when I asked you to write down your dream, the real one, the version of your business 3 years from now when everything has gone right. I asked you to be specific, to be bold, and to let the dream be the dream first and build the plan second. And if you did that exercise, I want you to bring that picture to mind again right now. I want you to ask a question that I think is more important than almost anything else we've covered this season. Who do you have to become to actually build that? Because here is something that I've noticed, both in my own life and in the hundreds of business owners I've coached, is we tend to think the gap between where we are and our dream is a strategy gap. More tactics, better systems, smarter marketing, and those things matter. But underneath all of it, there is a deeper gap that almost no one names directly. And it's an identity gap. It's the dream that you wrote down. Like that dream that you wrote down, I guess, does not need the leader that you are today. It needs the leader that you have not become yet. And so today we're going to talk about that gap and what it is, why it feels the way it feels, and exactly what it takes to close it. And this is some of the most important work that we will all do this season. So let's jump into this. And I want to explain something that I want to talk about the identity gap. And I'm sure some of you have heard this before. I see this on a daily basis with clients that I coach, but I want to explain exactly what I mean by the identity gap, because I think once you see it, you will recognize it everywhere in your own life. Every dream you hold, every meaningful one anyway, implies a version of you that does not exist yet. Not because you're not good enough right now, but because the dream, by definition, is bigger than your current reality. And your current reality was built by the person that you currently are. The skills you have, the habits you have, the way you currently think, decide, lead, and show up. And so if the dream is bigger than your current reality, and your current reality is a direct reflection of who you are currently, then the dream requires you to be someone different than who you currently are. Not fundamentally different, not a different person with a different soul, but meaningfully evolved, expanded, matured into a version of yourself that does not yet fully exist. And that's the identity gap. The distance between who you are and who your dream requires you to become. And here's why this matters so much, is that most entrepreneurs experience that gap as frustration, self-doubt, or feeling that something is wrong with them. They look at the dream, they look at their current reality, and they feel the distance between the two as evidence that they are failing and that they're not good enough, that they're not far enough along, not who they're supposed to be now. But the gap is not evidence of failure. The gap is the most natural thing in the world. Every single person who has ever built something meaningful has stood exactly where you are standing, looking at a dream that their current self could not yet reach and feeling the discomfort of that distance. The gap is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that the dream is actually big enough to be worth pursuing. And if the gap between who you are and your dream did not exist, the dream would not be big enough to need you to grow. And so why does the gap feel like failure? Well, I want to spend a few minutes on why this gap feels so uncomfortable, because understanding the why changes your relationship to the discomfort itself. It feels like failure because we expect growth to be linear. We have this quiet, often unconscious belief that growth should feel like steady, visible progress, a little bit better every day, a clear upward line in a chart. And when growth instead feels like confusion, like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, like long stretches where nothing seems to be changing at all, we interpret this as something going wrong. But identity growth has never worked that way. Not for you, not for me, and not for anyone who's ever actually transformed into someone new. It's nonlinear. It has plateaus that feel endless and breakthroughs that feel sudden. And it often gets worse, more uncomfortable and more uncertain right before it gets better. And this is not a flaw in the process, that is the process. Now, it feels like failure because the old identity does not want to leave quietly. The version of you that got you to where you are right now, that built the real things, the real wins, the real competence, the real identity, that version of you is not going to step aside just because you have decided to dream bigger. It's still going to show up in old habits, old fears, old patterns of self-protection that used to keep you safe and now keep you small. That tension between the identity that built your current reality and the identity that your dream requires is going to feel like that internal conflict because it is an internal conflict. It is not a sign that you're broken. It's a sign that an old version of you is being asked to retire and is taking its time. It feels like failure because we compare our middle to someone else's highlight reel. This one is simple, but it's worth naming clearly because you are standing in the messy, uncomfortable middle of your own becoming. And you are comparing that mess to the polished, finished, highlight reel version of someone else's journey. Someone who is years ahead of you, showing you only the parts that have already resolved. And that comparison will always make your middle feel like failure because you are comparing a process to an outcome. So stop doing that to yourself because you're not behind. You are in the part of the story that does not photograph well yet. So the 4 identities your dream are going to require. And I want to get specific now because the identity gap is not just a feeling, it has shape. And there are specific identities that almost every growth stage entrepreneur has to grow into on the way to a bigger dream. And I want to walk you through 4 of the most common ones that I see. Identity 1 is from the doer to the visionary. The identity that built your business in its early stages or early days was the doer. The person who could figure anything out, execute anything, hold the whole thing together through sheer competence and effort. That identity is incredibly valuable. And it is probably the reason that you've gotten this far. But the dream you wrote down requires a different identity. It requires a visionary, someone whose primary value is not what they personally execute, but the clarity and direction they provide for an entire team. That is an uncomfortable shift because the doer gets validation from being busy and capable. And the visionary gets validation from things working well without their hands directly on them. And that is a completely different source of self-worth, and building it takes time. Identity number 2 is from the approval seeker to the conviction holder. Early in business, you needed external validation. You needed clients to say yes, an audience to respond, a market to prove the idea had legs. That need for approval is not a flaw. It is often what kept you going through the hardest days. But the dream requires a different relationship to approval. It requires you to be able to hold a vision, a price, a boundary, even a direction, even when it is not universally applauded, even when some people do not get it, and even when the data is not fully in yet. And that requires moving from a person who needs the room to agree with them to a person whose conviction can hold steady, even when the room is unsure. Now, the 3rd identity is from the soloist to the conductor. That identity that got you here was probably someone who could almost do everything in the business personally and do it well. And so that soloist identity feels safe because your competence is the variable that you control. And the dream requires a conductor, someone whose job is not to play every instrument, but to bring out the best performance from everyone else's instrument. And that is genuinely different, genuinely a different skill set and a genuinely different identity. And it means your value shifts from what you personally produce to what you enable other people to produce. And so for many entrepreneurs, that shift feels like losing relevance. It is actually the opposite. It is that identity that makes the next level really possible. And the 4th identity is from the survivor to the steward. The last one is the deepest, and I think the most important, because in the early stages of building something, much of your identity gets organized around survival, making it work, keep the lights on, get through this month, this quarter, this launch. And the dream that you wrote down requires a different orientation entirely. It requires you to become a steward, someone who holds the business not as something to survive, but as something to tend, to grow with intention, to shape over years rather than just to get through. And that shift from survival mode to stewardship changes how you make decisions, how you think about time, and how you relate to the whole enterprise you are building. Stewardship is a quieter identity than survival. It is a less adrenaline driven, it's more deliberate. And for entrepreneurs who have spent years in survival mode, the shift into stewardship can feel almost unfamiliar, like learning to walk after years of running. So, how do we close this gap? Well, how do you actually close the identity gap? Not by just waiting for it to happen naturally, though some of it will over time, is you close it deliberately through three specific practices. Number one is that you need to act from the future identity before you fully feel it. And I have to coach clients on this all the time because you do not have to feel like the visionary or the conviction holder or the conductor or the steward before you start acting like one. And in fact, you never will. The feeling follows the action, not the other way around. So this week, in one specific decision, ask yourself, what would the leader that my dream requires do here? Then do that. Even if it feels like you are playing a part that you have not fully grown into yet, that is exactly how growing into it works. The second thing is to let go of the identity that built your current success. And this is harder than it sounds because the old identity worked. It got you here, but holding on to it, its past, its useless, its usefulness is what keeps so many entrepreneurs stuck at the level of that old identity that it was built for. And so identify one specific way that you are still operating from the doer, the approval seeker, the soloist, or the survivor, and consciously choose to let it go this week. And even in the new way, even if it feels uncertain thinking of this new way. And then the third thing is to surround yourself with people who reflect the identity back to you. This is one of the most underrated tools in identity growth is the people around you, your team, your peers, your coach, your community, and they either reflect your old identity back to you or your emerging one. So if everyone around you still relates to you as the person that you were 2 years ago, it becomes much harder to step into who you're becoming. Seeking out rooms, relationships, and mentors who already see and relate to the future version of you. That reflection accelerates the becoming more than almost anything else. And so I want to leave you with this. The discomfort that you feel when you look at your dream and you look at your current reality and notice the distance between them, that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is the most honest signal that you will ever get that you are exactly where growth happens. You are not behind, you are not failing. You are in the middle of becoming the leader that your dream has been quietly asking you to become since the day you wrote it down. And that becoming is slow sometimes and uncomfortable often and non-linear always, but is also the most meaningful work you'll ever do because the business that you are building and the person that you are becoming are not two separate projects. They're the same project. So keep dreaming big, keep leading better. The leader that your dream needs is closer than you think, and you're already becoming them. So if this episode landed for you, share it with someone who's in the middle of their own becoming right now. They need to hear that the discomfort is not failure. And if you've not yet left a review on Apple Podcasts, I would be so grateful. It takes 3 minutes and it helps the show reach more people who need exactly this conversation. And next episode, we're going to talk about something that follows directly from today. What happens when your team has not caught up to the dream yet? And how to bring them with you instead of leaving them behind. So I will see you then on the next episode of your Dream Coach podcast.